As time passed, the deeper regions of the far western land gradually became more lively. Even the area where the northern domain forces were stationed started to see other powers drawing near. However, fortunately, once those powers noticed, they chose to steer clear to avoid conflict. After all, in times like these, no one wanted to make unnecessary enemies. And so, amidst this growing stir, 5 days quietly passed. When the 5th day arrived, Chen, who had been sitting cross-legged on the mountain peak, meditating with his eyes closed, sensed something and opened his eyes. He stood up and gazed in the distant direction. The space over there was still in a violent storm, but that turmoil was gradually calming. The fluctuating spatial cracks even showed signs of slowly stabilizing. From afar, it seemed as though an invisible giant hand was trying to repair the shattered space. It was nothing short of miraculous. That is the self-repair of the shattered space by the heavens and earth. Mandala's voice came from behind him. She stood atop a green stone, with the fierce wind blowing her robes, causing them to flutter. Her petite figure looked as though it might be swept away by the wind. However, only those who were familiar with her knew just how terrifying the power hidden within that seemingly delicate body was. Chen nodded. His gaze then sharpened as he looked around the distant surroundings. This moment, he could clearly sense, within the range centered around the far western land, powerful spiritual energy fluctuations that made his hair stand on end. These waves of energy were quietly spreading and shaking the space. These intense spiritual energy fluctuations, strong enough to shake the heavens and earth, clearly belonged to the leaders of the various top powers. Over the past period, they had been watching closely, waiting for the perfect opportunity. And that opportunity was today. On the mountaintop, all the northern domain forces sensed the spatial fluctuations from afar beginning to subside, and their faces showed expressions of joy. It seems we can find an opportunity to strike. One of them spoke from behind. Chen glanced over and saw that the person who had spoken was someone very familiar. Lu Tiandao, the master of Xun'er Palace. There had been no small amount of enmity between him and Xun'er Palace in the past. Lu Ming and Lu Yan had both suffered heavy losses at his hands. However, with the current strength of the Great Luo Heaven Domain, Xun'er Palace no longer had its previous grandeur. Therefore, Lu Tiandao's tone was clearly less arrogant now. Moreover, with top experts from all factions gathering in the far western land, their lower Earth supreme level strength was relatively ordinary here. If it weren't for Mandala, a higher Earth supreme, overseeing the place, they probably wouldn't have been able to hold this position and would have been driven out by other forces long ago. When Chen's gaze landed on Lu Tiandao, the latter also sensed it and immediately looked uncomfortable. His face twitched, and he quickly turned his gaze away. As for the situation in the ancient heavenly palace, I'm sure you're all aware. This time, we'll work together to stabilize a spatial passage and send our people through, Mandala said, looking around. However, this passage can't accommodate too many people, so the spots are limited. Our Great Luo Heaven Domain requires 3. The Northern Realm Alliance consisted of 5 factions, and they estimated that they could only send about 10 people through. The Great Luo Heaven Domain taking 3 spots was already a significant share. However, no one objected to this. With Mandala's strength, she was qualified to claim more spots. Chen, 9 Nether, and this young lady, Lin Jing, the 3 spots for the Great Luo Heaven Domain will be given to you. Mandala turned to Chen and the others. Lu Tiandao and the others were somewhat surprised. After all, in the Great Luo Heaven Domain, the strongest after the Earth Supreme would be the Sleeping King, yet Mandala had no intention of sending him this time. Moreover, while Chen and 9 Nether were expected, who was this Lin Jing? Me too? Thank you so much, Domain Lord. Lin Jing, standing beside Chen, was also a bit stunned, but then her bright eyes sparkled with joy. I think even without our help, you'd still find a way into the ancient heavenly palace. Since that's the case, why not do a favor while we're at it? Mandala smiled and said directly. Although Lin Jing had not reached Earth Supreme, Mandala's intuition told her that the violent space outside the ancient heavenly palace would not be able to stop her. Lin Jing smiled and blinked her big eyes, but avoided the question about the mandala. While Lin Jing was talking to Mandala, the forces of Xiantian Palace, Netherworld Palace, and others had also decided on their candidates. These were all elders under their command, powerful individuals who had reached the 9th grade supreme level. Among them, the strongest one was an elder from Xiantian Palace, who possessed peak 9th grade supreme strength, making him the strongest among them. Peak 9th grade. Mu Chen was slightly surprised, not expecting that Xiantian Palace had recruited some powerful warriors over the past year. It seemed they had put in a lot of effort. This person is named Xianming Supreme, and he is an extremely famous powerhouse in our northern domain. He has always been a loner, quite proud. This time, however, he was recruited by Xiantian Palace at great cost. 9 Nether whispered beside Mu Chen. Mu Chen nodded slightly. Mandala glanced at everyone and said, "This time, as we enter the ancient heavenly palace, we are all teammates. If anyone encounters trouble, I hope everyone will lend a hand. In a place like this, if hearts aren't in sync, it will be very difficult to progress." Mu Chen and the others solemnly nodded. Xianming Supreme then raised his eyelids, glancing at Mu Chen and the others, saying, "Lord of the Great Luo Domain, rest assured, I will take care of these juniors." His voice was hoarse, but it carried a hint of arrogance. This made the other selected individuals roll their eyes. This old man was really relying too much on his age. Mu Chen and 9 Nether smiled helplessly, but didn't say much. Although this old man was somewhat arrogant, he meant well, so there was no need to provoke him. Mandala saw this and just smiled, then nodded and said, "Since everyone is ready, we can set off now. Let's go." As soon as she finished speaking, her figure turned into a streak of light and shot into the sky, heading straight for the deepest part of the far western land. Lu Tiandao and the others immediately followed, and then came Mu Chen, 9 Nether, Lin Jing, Xianming Supreme, and the others who were selected to lead the charge into the ancient heavenly palace. Just as Mu Chen and the others set off, waves of vast and powerful spiritual energy fluctuated in the outer regions of the far western wilderness, causing the entire world to tremble. Clearly, the leaders of the top forces were making their moves at this time. Whoosh, Mu Chen and the others quickly followed Mandala deeper into the far western land. As they ventured further, they began to feel the terrifying power of the shattered space. Waves of oppressive spatial storm aftershocks spread out from afar, and the tearing sensation of the storms made it feel as though their internal spiritual energy was about to break free from their bodies. Such a domineering force of spatial tearing, Mu Chen said, his expression serious. This was only the aftershock, and if they were in the midst of it, their bodies and spiritual energy would likely be torn to shreds. He looked up and saw that the distant space was beginning to show signs of breaking apart. Black spatial rifts stretched out like giant dragons, and the spatial fluctuations emanating from the rifts caused their scalps to tingle. Mandala and the others stopped several thousand meters away from one of the spatial rifts. The immense spiritual energy within her body radiated out, protecting Mu Chen and the others, blocking the effects of the spatial storm. Mu Chen and the others stood before the massive spatial rift, and the darkness surged toward them like a black hole, deep and unfathomable. If they looked closely, they could faintly see some ancient palaces in the depths of the darkness, exuding an aura of age and mystery. This was the entrance to the ancient heavenly palace. Mandala turned her head, exchanged glances with several other lower earth supremes, and they simultaneously made their move. A solid pillar of spiritual energy surged from their bodies, like towering columns, forcefully charging into the black rift caused by the spatial storm. Boom! Boom! The pillar swept in, and a booming sound echoed, causing the world to shake. The spatial storm in that area was gradually torn apart, forming a gap about 10 meters wide under the impact of the vast spiritual pillars. Mu Chen watched in awe as the spatial storm was forcibly torn apart. No wonder they were Earth Supremes. The immense spiritual power they wielded was like the full moon compared to the fireflies of the 9th grade Supremes. Let's go. Mandala commanded in a low voice. Mu Chen looked up, only to see countless massive pillars of spiritual energy shooting up into the sky from all directions, piercing the heavens. In the distance, the spatial rifts were also being torn open, creating gaping voids. The top forces from all over Tian Luo continent had chosen the same method at this moment, forcibly tearing apart the space and sending the strongest within this realm into it. Using this as a medium to descend upon the heavenly palace. One could only imagine the fierce and brutal competition that would erupt inside the ancient heavenly palace after so many prodigies were sent in. Whoosh. Mu Chen took a deep breath, his eyes gradually sharpening. Move, he uttered lowly, no longer hesitating. His body transformed into a streak of light, darting straight into one of the voids within the spatial storm. Behind him, Jiuyo, Linjing, and the others immediately followed, quickly vanishing into the void. Resembling a great rock soaring into the sky. As they entered the spatial rift, a deep, burning intensity surged in Mu Chen's heart. Immortal golden body. I'm coming. Upon entering the spatial void, Mu Chen and the others immediately felt an overwhelming darkness engulfing them. Violent spatial fluctuations raged around them, like a storm, as if attempting to destroy the spatial passage they were traveling through. Mu Chen and his group, seeing the seemingly unstable spatial passage, couldn't help but feel tense. If the passage collapsed here, their chances of survival would be slim. Fortunately, the spatial passage, built by several Earth Supremes such as Mandala, remained surprisingly stable. Despite the twisting and warping, it held firm and had not been destroyed. Mu Chen and the others proceeded swiftly through the spatial tunnel. In the darkness, spatial rifts occasionally appeared. When Mu Chen's gaze passed through these cracks, he could faintly glimpse ancient landscapes, vast land and skies. This space seemed to be sealing off an ancient region. Stay alert. Mu Chen glanced at the others and reminded them. When we enter the ancient heavenly palace, stay behind me. I won't be able to look after all of you, he continued. However, before his words had fully left his mouth, a somewhat arrogant voice interrupted. It was the Xianming Supreme from Xiantian Palace. He wore a stoic expression and cast Mu Chen a sideways glance. His gaze carried a hint of advice, as if to tell Mu Chen who should be the leader of this group. The others were slightly displeased by the old man's arrogance, but considering his peak 9th grade strength, it seemed that he was indeed the strongest among them. Following him might be the safest bet. As for Mu Chen, though he was famous in the northern domain, he was still only a half-step 9th grade, which made him seem somewhat inferior compared to the Xianming Supreme. With this thought, some of the group members moved closer to the Xianming Supreme. Mu Chen's face twitched when he saw this. This old man was really something else. What leader? Did he think Mu Chen didn't want to take charge? Mu Chen exchanged a glance with Jiuyo, who shrugged helplessly. There was no reasoning with such an obstinate and arrogant old man, and clearly, he didn't think much of them. The younger generation. Mu Chen grimaced. He didn't feel like arguing with this old ghost over such trivial matters. Once they entered the ancient heavenly palace, if the opportunity arose, he would take the lead with Jiuyo and Linjing, leaving the old man behind. Seeing that Mu Chen was silent, the Xianming Supreme took it as agreement and nodded with satisfaction. After this brief interruption, the group continued through the spatial tunnel. As time passed, they could feel the passage nearing its end. Mu Chen's gaze swept around, and his expression tightened. He noticed the surrounding space growing increasingly unstable, and every so often, other spatial passages appeared, each with silhouettes of people inside. Clearly, these were other groups heading to the ancient heavenly palace. The spatial passages crossed each other, and both sides kept their guard up, only relaxing once they were far enough apart. Mu Chen exhaled a sigh of relief as he observed the intersecting spatial passages. Just as the sigh escaped his lips, a chill suddenly rose within him. He felt an extremely dangerous gaze locking onto him. He suddenly lifted his head and looked to the right. There, the space rippled, and a spatial passage appeared, with a dozen figures emerging from within. Among these figures, Mu Chen spotted a familiar one. It was none other than the 4th prince of the great Xia dynasty, Xia Hong. At this moment, Xia Hong looked slightly disheveled, with one arm hanging limply and his face pale. Clearly, he had also noticed Mu Chen. His eyes immediately turned vicious, and he turned to speak to someone beside him. Mu Chen shifted his gaze to the person next to Xia Hong and then narrowed his eyes. The man beside Xia Hong was dressed in golden robes. He had a handsome face and an air of calm dignity. Every move he made exuded the authority of someone in power, creating a palpable sense of pressure. Although Xia Hong was considered a genius, standing beside this man made him seem somewhat dull in comparison, which only served to make the golden-robed figure shine even brighter. The dangerous gaze that Mu Chen sensed came from this man. Such a small world, Mu Chen muttered, frowning slightly. He hadn't expected to encounter someone from the great Xia dynasty even before entering the ancient heavenly palace. Moreover, the man in golden robes, if he wasn't mistaken, was likely the 4th-ranked individual on the strongest list, the crown prince of the great Xia dynasty, Xiaoyu. Mu Chen kept his focus on the golden-robed man, who, after listening to Xia Hong, looked over at him indifferently. His gaze was like that of a sovereign emperor, devoid of emotion. He glanced at Mu Chen for a moment before lowering his eyelids, as if disinterested. Nevertheless, he gave a faint nod. His nod was clearly not a gesture towards Mu Chen, because right after it, 3 figures emerged from the ranks of the great Xia dynasty's people. They were 3 elderly men, each radiating powerful spiritual energy, clearly 3 ninth-grade peaks, their strength matching that of the Xianming Supreme. Without hesitation, the 3 of them launched a fierce attack with a single punch. Boom! A tremendous wave of spiritual energy surged forward like a massive tidal wave, rushing toward Mu Chen and his group. Their intent was clear, to shatter the spatial passage. Damn it! These bastards! The experts from the Northern Realm Alliance turned ashen, clearly shocked by the maliciousness of the attack. Even the Xianming Supreme's expression darkened. His hands moved rapidly to form seals, and soon, ice-blue spiritual energy surged out of him, forming an enormous ice shield. It passed through the spatial passage and created a protective barrier. Here, he was the only one at the 9th grade peak. If a regular 9th grade spiritual energy passed through the spatial passage, it would be torn apart by the violent spatial storm outside. Boom! The powerful assault from the 3 9th grade peaks struck the ice shield, causing a violent explosion. The ice shield shattered, and cracks quickly spread across it. Eventually, it exploded into pieces. With the shield broken, the Xianming Supreme's face changed slightly. After all, he couldn't handle 3 opponents of equal strength alone. Even though the shield shattered, the shockwaves from the attack continued to surge, threatening to destabilize the spatial passage. The others' expressions changed, panic evident in their eyes. If the spatial passage malfunctioned, they would all be doomed. However, just as everyone was on edge, Mu Chen took a step forward. He flicked his sleeve, and countless spiritual seals, like ethereal spirits, swept out and merged into the space outside the passage. The seals resonated, quickly forming layers of spirit arrays. From the moment Mu Chen first saw Xia Yu and Xia Hong, he had already begun gathering the spiritual seals in secret as a precaution, and now was the perfect moment to activate them all. Boom, boom. Although these spirit arrays weren't of the highest rank, their sheer quantity and defensive nature gave them immense strength. When combined, they formed an incredibly powerful defense. As a result, when the shockwave hit and destroyed several of the spirit arrays, their power was finally drained, and the wave quickly dissipated. Phew! The others let out a collective sigh of relief, clearly relaxed now. On the other side of the spatial passage, Xia Yu noticed the failure of his subordinate's attack. He raised his head, slightly surprised to see that a half-step 9th grade practitioner like Mu Chen could withstand the aftermath of 3 9th grade peak attacks. A spirit array master, huh? He murmured to himself. Then, with a soft smile, his voice pierced through the spatial passage and directly reached Mu Chen's group. Brother Mu, truly impressive. If we meet again inside the ancient heavenly palace, I hope to have the honor of learning from you. He smiled gently, as if he were sparring with a friend, as though the ruthless attack from before had never been his doing. Mu Chen's face remained expressionless. Compared to Xia Hong, this guy was clearly far more dangerous. If Xia Hong was like a ferocious wolf, then this one was more like a venomous snake, silent and concealed. Once it struck, it would surely be deadly. It seemed that if they encountered him again, they would need to be more cautious. As soon as Xia Yu's voice fell, he waved his sleeve, and with some reluctance, Xia Hong and the others swiftly made their way through the spatial passage. In the blink of an eye, they had vanished from Mu Chen and the others' sight. His departure was quite graceful. Since the time spent crossing the spatial passage was extremely short, he had not acted earlier, relying on his status instead. Now, there was no longer enough time to make a move, so he simply left. With Xia Yu's departure, the people from the Northern Realm Alliance muttered a few curses under their breath before they cupped their fists in gratitude to Mu Chen. If it weren't for the Xianming Supreme weakening their offensive, I wouldn't have been able to stop them so easily. Mu Chen smiled faintly and said in response to their thanks. Hearing this, Xianming Supreme was momentarily stunned. Then, his aged face showed some discomfort. Clearly, he hadn't expected the usually hot-blooded Mu Chen to praise him. Truly, The new generation is surpassing the old that I never thought that the younger generation of the Northern Realm would have come this far, Xianming Supreme said, his gaze softening considerably. His previous pride seemed to have lessened that he knew well that although he had weakened the enemy's attack right away, the residual force was still formidable. Even if he had gone all out, he would have been somewhat pressured that he never expected that Mu Chun had already set up a powerful spirit array to block it in advance. That Mu Chun smiled politely. Despite his not-so-great relationship with the Shantian Palace, they were allies now, and there was no need to make things too awkward. We'll be there soon. Mu Chun glanced toward the spatial passage ahead, where the spatial fluctuations began to stabilize. A faint white halo appeared, marking the end of the passage. Be careful when entering the ancient heavenly palace. The others nodded in agreement. In that cautious state, they swiftly passed through the spatial passage. The white halo at the end surged toward them, and Mu Chun and his companions stepped through. The dark environment that had once surrounded them quickly faded from their sight. They squinted for a moment before adjusting, immediately scanning their surroundings. They found themselves standing on a hill, and the entire world around them was eerily silent, as if devoid of life. An ancient aura lingered in the air. Mu Chun gazed at this ancient world, his heart stirred with excitement. Had he finally entered the ancient heavenly palace? The ancient world was thick with a desolate energy, the sky dim, and the space still showed signs of instability. Occasionally, rifts in space would spread across the sky. Mu Chun and his companions stood on the hill, surveying the ancient space that had drawn the attention of countless strong figures from the Tianluo continent. Beyond the hill, the land stretched far, with towering mountains rising from the ground. Ancient palaces were faintly visible atop those mountains if they looked even. Further, they could barely make out floating stone islands in the sky, all of which showed signs of desolation. This space seemed to have been silent for millennia. Mu Chun took a deep breath, then exchanged a glance with Nine Nether and Lin Jing. Their expressions grew serious, as they could sense some faint traces of lingering energy in the air. These energies were so thin that only those with sharp senses could vaguely detect them. Despite their thinness, they still gave Mu Chun and the others a strange feeling of oppression. It was easy to imagine that, in ancient times, this place must have been home to terrifyingly powerful beings, capable of shaking the very heavens with a single thought. Even after countless years, their residual aura still lingered, leaving an oppressive atmosphere. No wonder it's called the Ancient Heavenly Palace. Mu Chun thought to himself that he then turned to Xianming Supreme, smiling. Do you have any suggestions? If not, shall we proceed? Based on my guess, we are probably only at the outermost area of the Ancient Heavenly Palace. The Xianming Supreme seemed to know very little about the Ancient Heavenly Palace, to the point where he didn't even know where he was at this moment. So, when he heard Mu Chun's inquiry, he felt a bit embarrassed. He quickly cleared his throat and nodded. The others, naturally, had no objections and nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Mu Chun didn't say anything further. He looked up to orient himself, then swiftly shot off in the direction of the distant peaks where the palaces were located. Behind him, the others hurriedly followed. Flying through the air, Mu Chun and his group looked down, and their expressions grew serious. Only now did they realize that the land below them was covered with countless deep, bottomless black abysses. These chasms split the earth, giving off a sinister and grim feeling. These abysses weren't naturally formed. They were the result of violent battles from ancient times. It was clear that in the distant past, a cataclysmic war had once raged here. Occasionally, they could spot the ruins of ancient cities on the ground, all of which had been completely destroyed. Therefore, Mu Chun and the others didn't stop to investigate them. After traveling at full speed for almost half an hour, Mu Chun and his group finally arrived at the mountain peaks. As they landed on one of the peaks, they noticed figures appearing on distant peaks. It was obvious that these figures belonged to people from other forces. However, recklessly acting before fully understanding the situation here would be reckless. So, everyone remained on guard from a distance, observing each other without interfering. Mu Chun withdrew his gaze and looked at the ruins of a large hall in front of him. Outside the hall, he could see some skeletal remains, all lying on their backs, seemingly staring at the sky. The skeletal faces were frozen in expressions of sheer terror. as if something dreadful had descended from the sky. This should be one of the defensive points on the outskirts of the ancient heavenly palace, Chen said. He stood still, gazing at the sky, his expression solemn. If he wasn't mistaken, in ancient times, it was probably the extraterritorial clan that descended from here and began attacking the ancient heavenly palace in the Tianluo continent. The outer defenses of the ancient heavenly palace were likely destroyed in an instant, with the defenders not even having time to escape, their lives snuffed out in an instant. Chen watched for a while, then crouched down. He noticed a faint glimmer in the hand of one of the skeletons. Gently prying it open, he revealed a bronze token. He picked up the token and noticed that it was adorned with ancient, palace-like carvings, with a faint image of a green wolf. A green wolf token? Chen stared at the token, about to inspect it further, when suddenly the token cracked and crumbled into powder, scattering in the wind. Chen froze for a moment, then looked at the other skeletons. He saw that each of them was holding a bronze token, though these tokens only had a white wolf pattern carved on them. These are probably symbols of rank and identity, said Xun'er from the side. Chen nodded. From the skeletal remains, it was clear that the owner of the green wolf token had been more powerful in life, while those with the white wolf tokens were likely of a more ordinary rank. The clues here were limited, and after the others searched around for a while, they all shook their heads, indicating that they had found nothing else. However, Chen wasn't disappointed. Instead, he looked up towards the distance and smiled. It seems we're on the right track. In the direction he was looking, the mountains stretched endlessly, but faintly, the shadow of an ancient palace could be seen far in the distance. Let's go. Without hesitation, Chen led the way, speeding up towards the deep mountains, where he felt a faint fluctuation of spiritual energy. As they increased their speed, the mountains rushed past beneath them. And soon they began to see floating stone islands in the distant sky. They were clearly getting closer to the true ancient heavenly palace. Whoosh! The group flew through the air at high speed. But just as they were about to enter a certain area, Chen's pupils suddenly contracted. His body tensed, and he immediately stopped, barking, "Stop!" Behind him, Xun'er, Linjing, and the others immediately halted. Only one of the newly ascended 9th grade experts wasn't quick enough and surged forward. Bang! Chen shot out his hand like lightning, grabbing the person's shoulder and forcefully stopping him from moving any further. The newly ascended 9th grade Supreme stood frozen, his body rigid with fear. His gaze was locked onto a point mere inches ahead of him, where the void itself seemed to shimmer with countless threads of spiritual energy. These threads were nearly imperceptible, yet upon closer inspection, they densely filled the sky. Though they appeared faint, an inexplicable chill crept into the hearts of everyone present. It felt as if even the slightest contact with these threads would lead to utter annihilation. Chen slowly pulled the 9th grade Supreme back, remaining silent for a moment before retrieving a long spear. Without hesitation, he hurled it forward. Hiss! The moment the spear touched the spiritual energy threads, it was sliced into several pieces in an instant. A faint tremor ran through the remnants before they disintegrated completely into specks of light, vanishing without a trace. A collective gasp echoed through the crowd. That spear had been a mid-grade artifact, its durability unquestionable, yet it had been destroyed so effortlessly. If a person had collided with those threads, even a 9th grade Supreme would have faced certain death. How terrifying, Linjing gasped, a trace of lingering fear in her voice. The rescued 9th grade Supreme was drenched in cold sweat. His eyes, filled with gratitude, turned to Chen. A moment later, and he would have ended up just like that spear, shredded into countless light fragments. His Supreme likely unable to endure the destruction. This is a spirit array. Chen's gaze fixed on the densely woven spiritual energy threads in the void, his expression slightly grave. He had already noticed the way these threads interconnected, emitting familiar fluctuations. More importantly, those fluctuations were so powerful they made his scalp tingle. This grand array had to be at least Grandmaster level, strong enough to trouble even an Earth Supreme. What do we do now? Xianming Supreme's face had paled. If not for Chen's timely warning, they would have suffered heavy casualties. Find an entrance. Chen remained composed. Based on his assessment, this formation was likely the protective grand array surrounding the outer perimeter of the ancient heavenly palace. If that were the case, then there had to be a passageway for the disciples stationed outside. The others nodded in agreement. Given the vast expanse covered by the array, they had no hope of advancing unless they found an entry point. With a clear objective, the group cautiously moved along the array's edge, keeping low to the ground. As they searched, as they scouted, the The surrounding area grew livelier. The air rippled with the sounds of rushing wind as numerous figures rapidly approached. However, their arrival was soon accompanied by agonized screams. Some reckless individuals had charged directly into the array, only to be instantly reduced to countless light fragments, their very existence erased. The horrifying spectacle sent waves of panic through the crowd. Chaos ensued. But it didn't take long for others to grasp the danger. They quickly backed away, avoiding the array's edge while also beginning their own search for an entrance. With so many people scouring the area, it wasn't long before Mu Chen's group picked up on some movement. Roughly half an hour later, they hastened toward the source of the disturbance, arriving atop a massive rock formation. More figures continued to converge, drawn by the commotion. In just a matter of minutes, the sky and ground of the region were densely packed with silhouettes. Mu Chen swept his gaze across the gathering, his eyes narrowing slightly. Among these figures, he sensed several exceptionally powerful spiritual fluctuations, ones that were at least as formidable as Xia Hong. This place had truly become a gathering of elites. As that thought crossed his mind, Mu Chen turned his attention forward. There, atop a mountain peak, stood a colossal stone gate. Ancient and imposing, its surface was inscribed with countless intricate runes, radiating an air of profound mystery. Upon the gate, 3 archaic characters faintly shimmered into view. That is, Mu Chen's eyes narrowed as he focused on the ancient inscription, Dragon Ascension Gate. Dragon Ascension Gate? What is that? It seems like passing through here is the only way to enter the true ancient heavenly palace. As Mu Chen's gaze settled on the massive, ancient stone gate, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Powerhouses from various factions exchanged uncertain glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. So the Dragon Ascension Gate truly exists. Mu Chen murmured, his eyes lingering on the gate as he let out a soft sigh. Do you know? Nine Nether asked, surprised, as the others also stared at Mu Chen in shock. Mu Chen nodded. The only reason he knew was that, before entering the ancient heavenly palace, he had already learned a lot of information from Mandala. And one of the things he learned was about the so-called Dragon Ascension Gate. What does this Dragon Ascension Gate do? Lin Jing asked curiously. In ancient times, all disciples entering the ancient heavenly palace would pass through this Dragon Ascension Gate. The gate would assess their strength and potential, and then assign them the corresponding rank. The more outstanding disciples could even take this opportunity to soar to the heavens. That's why it's also called the Dragon Ascension Gate, Mu Chen explained. Rank. The group was taken aback. Do you remember those blue wolf tokens we found among the bones earlier? That's one example. Mu Chen nodded, his gaze filled with interest as he looked at the ancient stone gate standing between the heavens and earth, blocking everyone from entering. It is said that the disciples of the ancient heavenly palace are divided into 4 ranks. The lowest is the wolf token, followed by the eagle token, the flood dragon token, and the highest, the dragon token. Within each rank, the colors vary. White is the lowest, followed by blue, and then gold. Those bones we found. Those people were probably wolf token disciples when they were alive. And the disciples who receive the dragon token are said to become core members of the ancient heavenly palace. They receive massive cultivation resources and, in the future, may even compete for the position of elder or hall master. Everyone suddenly realized, if one was ranked as a dragon token disciple, it was truly a step to the top. Dragon Ascension Gate was no exaggeration. This Dragon Ascension Gate is probably the only passage into the ancient heavenly palace. To enter, you must first become a disciple of the palace. Mu Chen continued. His eyes grew hotter as he stared at the gate. According to Mandala, if the Dragon Ascension Gate still existed, he must become a dragon token disciple. Only dragon token disciples had the right to enter the deepest part of the ancient heavenly palace's scripture pavilion. Though Mu Chen wasn't sure if the scripture pavilion still stood or if the old rules were still in place. As long as the Dragon Ascension Gate was still here, he had to earn the Dragon Token Disciple rank. Otherwise, if he reached the Scripture Pavilion but couldn't enter due to his rank, he would regret it forever. To obtain the method to evolve into the Great Sun indestructible body, he had to leave nothing to chance. This is interesting. I'll have to see what rank I get. Lin Jing's bright eyes sparkled as she smiled. Clearly eager to find out. 9 Nether looked around at the surroundings, slightly moved. She had already noticed that, as time passed, more and more incredibly powerful geniuses were gathering here. It seems you're not the only one who knows about the Dragon Ascension Gate, 9 Nether murmured as she observed the situation. Mu Chen wasn't surprised. The top forces of Tianluo continent had been investigating the ancient heavenly palace for years, so the function of the Dragon Ascension Gate was not exactly a secret. It said that there are 3 Dragon Ascension Gates around the perimeter of the ancient heavenly palace. If it were only at one of them, if it were any other, the scene would be much grander, Mu Chen said with a smile. Should we take action? Nine Nether asked, eager to try. Not yet. Let's wait a bit, Mu Chen replied, shaking his head with a smile. Right now, the area was filled with top-tier geniuses from Tianluo continent, and he wanted to see how they would fare when facing the assessment of the Dragon Ascension Gate. Lin Jing and Nine Nether didn't disagree. In fact, they seemed more interested in watching the others. While they waited, the wind began to howl, and figures rained down like a storm, filling the area with more and more activity. Hey, isn't that ghost hand Lu Kuei from the Shadow Ghost sect? He's here too. As more powerful figures gathered, some heavyweight characters appeared, causing a stir and drawing surprised exclamations from all around. Mu Chen and the others looked over at the source of the commotion. Dozens of gray shadows streaked from the distance, finally landing on a massive tree. The leader among them was a man in a gray robe. His face was ordinary, but his eyes were a pale gray, radiating a chilling aura that caused the surrounding temperature to drop rapidly. Ghost Hand Lu Kuei ranked 17th on the strongest list, peak 9th grade. Mu Chen observed the figure, his gaze flashing as a wealth of information surfaced in his mind. And Wang Tongxian ranked 16th. Shortly after Lu Kuei's appearance, another figure dressed in yellow swept through the air like a great rock, drawing exclamations from the crowd. After that, the heavens and earth erupted with cries of astonishment, with the top 20 elites on the strongest list showing up in just a few minutes. Among them were 5 or 6 of these exceptional individuals. All of them possessed peak 9th grade power, a level that surpassed even Xia Hong by 1 tier, explaining why their rankings were so much higher. Compared to them, Mu Chen, who had just overtaken Xia Hong and secured 20th place, appeared rather dull in this gathering. After their appearances, these young elites merely cast fiery gazes at the Dragon Ascension Gate, but none of them rashly attempted to approach it. They all waited quietly for the perfect opportunity. While waiting, Mu Chen's expression shifted, and he turned, his eyes filled with surprise as he noticed an incredibly sharp sword energy sweeping toward them. Whoosh! Just a few breaths after Mu Chen sensed the sword energy, he saw a streak of azure sword light cut across the sky. Finally landing on a nearby peak as the sword light dissipated, the figure beneath it was revealed. A young man in azure robes carrying a long azure sword on his back. He was handsome, with sharp eagle-like eyes that, when they scanned the area, made the air feel painfully sharp. Surrounding him was an extraordinarily powerful sword energy, as if the very space around him couldn't bear it, becoming riddled with cracks. The moment he appeared, countless strong figures turned their attention to him, especially the other young elites who had just appeared. Their expressions stiffened, filled with caution and wariness. He is. Nine Nether's beautiful eyes narrowed, her face turning serious as she sensed the danger this person posed. Qin Jingjia, ranked 5th on the strongest list. Mu Chen said slowly. To shock those ranked in the top 20 like this, there could be no other figure than Qin Jingjia, who stood at 5th place. Though Qin Jingjia also possessed peak 9th grade power, Mu Chen suspected his combat prowess had already surpassed that level. When Qin Jingjia appeared, he ignored the numerous wary gazes around him, his gaze calmly fixed on the Dragon Ascension Gate. It seems some top-tier figures have arrived here. Mu Chen smiled. Qin Jingjia was the highest ranked among those present. In fact, his 5th place ranking was considered extraordinary even among the younger generation across the entire Tianluo continent. With such a ranking, it was no surprise that Qin Jingjia regarded everyone else as insignificant. In his eyes, even other peak 9th grade elites like Lu Kuei were beneath him. The likes of Lu Kuei, Wang Tongxian, and others felt displeased by his arrogance, but they had no choice. Despite appearing to be peak 9th grade, if it came down to a confrontation, they were no match for Qin Jingjia. 5th place was no empty title. Buzz. As countless wary gazes focused on Qin Jingjia, a sudden buzzing sound seemed to reverberate through the heavens and earth. The buzzing sound traveled from afar, reaching Qin Jingjia's ears. His indifferent face instantly changed, and he looked up sharply, his eyes fixed on the distant sky. Mu Chen noticed the change in Qin Jingjia's demeanor and immediately tensed. Who could have startled him so? Could it be? With a grave expression, Chen lifted his gaze to the sky. A small black dot was rapidly tearing through the air, closing in fast. In just a few breaths, under countless eyes, it appeared in the sky above them. As the black dot grew closer, everyone saw that it was a black flying insect, roughly several meters in size. It had 4 wings, exuding a murderous aura, making it appear particularly fierce and menacing. Above the black beetle stood a graceful woman dressed in a white gown. Her dark hair was casually tied up, and she held a jade flute in her delicate hands. A radiant smile graced her beautiful face, which exuded an unusually soft charm. The contrast between the woman's gentleness and the menacing, ferocious black beetle beneath her feet created a striking and unsettling dissonance. Chen's gaze locked onto the woman in the white gown, and his expression grew increasingly serious. He exchanged a glance with Nether, and from the look in each other's eyes, both recognized a shared wariness. Among the younger generation in Tianluo continent, there was only one person who could make Qin Jingjia so wary, someone with such a unique appearance. That person was the insect master, Su Qingyin, who ranked second on the strongest list. To his surprise, this top-tier figure had also arrived at their side.